I want to talk about a topic today which is a tough one. It is a really tough topic, and I pray that I will do it justice. I've been praying about this all week long. I really want to do this topic justice. And on that note, I want to mention that there will still be many questions after I'm done talking about this. After I'm finished, there's still a lot of questions that could be asked, and once you know the topic, you'll understand that. I just want to help bring a little bit of comfort to people if I can. I want to offer that. How can a loving God allow suffering? That's the dilemma. How can a loving God allow suffering? That's a tough one. That is a tough question. I mean, look at the world. You've got so many broken lives out there. You've got bad things that happen to people. They didn't do anything to cause it. They were just a victim of it. You see all these bad things happening in our world, and the question is, if God really is a God of love, if he really, really, truly loves us, then why does he allow this? Because if you ask yourself, if I was God, would I intervene to stop some of that from happening? And all of us would say yes. Yes, I would. Then how could he allow it and be a loving God? It's a reasonable question. It's a reasonable question. The reason we would do it, the reason we would stop it, is because we don't understand things the way God understands them. We can't even wrap our minds around that. But I'm hoping to bring some clarity to this. This is the number one question asked about God, if you believe in God. I mean, you could say, is there a God? That's a leading question. You know, that's number one if you don't believe in God. But if you do believe there's a God, this is the number one question. How can a loving God allow suffering? And many times we don't know how to answer that question. We just don't know how to answer that. If you were to walk out here right now and somebody were to come up to you and say, oh, you came out of church, let me ask you a question. How can a loving God allow suffering? Most of us would stumble. Most of us wouldn't know how to answer that, especially if they told us what they're going through or what they saw. Or you talk about human trafficking, you talk about all these things that go on, and like, where's God? If he truly does love us, why does he allow suffering? Most of us would stumble if somebody were to ask us that question right now. Most of us would have a hard time with that. I've spoken on this subject before, but today I want to take it a little bit deeper. I want to bring a little bit more understanding to this. So to those of you who battle with this question, I hope to bring some clarity to why God allows suffering. And to those of you who just struggle to answer it when other people ask you this question, I hope to give you a solid biblical approach to how to answer that question when people come up to you with this question. But I feel like I need to briefly go over something that most of you have heard me preach before in order to help clarify why suffering is allowed. So let's go ahead and start at the very, very beginning here. 1 John 4:16. Let's look at this verse. God is love. That's what it says in that verse. God is love. Let's start at the very basics. Every one of us we're familiar with this verse. God is love. We can all give that to anybody. It's really not even hard to memorize. You got this. God is love. There's more to that verse, but this statement we can all nail down. God is love. This is one of the most misunderstood statements in the Bible. It does not say God is loving, even though he is. But that's not what it says. It doesn't say God is loving, it says God is love. It says this is who he is. Not what he does, this is who he is. God is love. Love must have a recipient. That's not hard to understand. How do you show love if there's nobody to show it to? Love has to have a recipient. It must have a recipient. So God created mankind. We're just starting at the beginning here, okay? And working our way through this. God created mankind. He created us in an environment that was not stained by sin. Look at Genesis 1 and 2. You can see God created us in an environment, and he said, and behold, everything is very good. No bad, no sin, no imperfections. He gave us life, and then he gave us an environment to live that life in, and it was very good. There was no suffering. He created it just the way he wanted it. This was his desire. This was his will. He gave us exactly what he wanted us to have. But that in itself brings up an interesting question. I'm going to cause a little trouble here because this is what I do. I like to stir the pot a little bit. So let's cause a little trouble here. If God created everything and he said, behold, it is very good, that brings up an interesting question. Why did he place the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the garden? Why did he give us that tree? Did he not know that Adam and Eve would sin? Did he not know? Of course he knew. Of course he knew they were going to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He created that tree. He put that tree in the garden, and he says, don't eat of that. Well, if you know they're going to sin, then why did you put that there? Why did you put that there? If he knew they were going to sin, then it's kind of his fault for making it possible, right? I mean, that's a logical assumption. If you knew they were going to sin and then you put that option out there for them, isn't it kind of your fault that's there and they sinned? Isn't that your fault? That is a logical assumption. I think we can all understand that. That seems fair. I mean, not fair to him, but it seems fair to us. That's a good question. That's a good question. But that can only be true if we believe that love can be forced. That's the only way that is a logical assumption, is if we believe that love can be forced. But love cannot be forced. It has to be chosen. Love is a choice. It cannot be forced. You cannot make someone love you against their will. That's not how love works. You cannot force love. Therefore, there had to be an option to reject God. If you only have one option, you have a mandatory situation. It's not even called an option at that point. It's just you're forced to do this because that's all you can do. It's a mandatory situation. Love cannot be mandatory. There is no relationship if one side is forced to be part of it. Lock that in. There is no relationship if one side is forced to be part of it. That is not a relationship. But I want to step back for a minute and show you a gift that God gave to mankind even before sin entered into the world. A lot of this, and we miss this, and this is key to understanding why God allows suffering. Don't miss this part. It's extremely important. Look at Genesis chapter 1 and verse 26. Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. God put us in charge. He gave us dominion over the earth. And we overlook this in this topic of suffering. We overlook this. God gave us dominion. He put us in charge over the earth. Yes, He is still God. But He allowed us to have free will, and He gave us an environment to perform that free will in. That means that our choices directly affect our environment. It just makes sense. If you own a home, the choices that you make in that home have an impact on that home. We all understand that. That's our dominion. That's our dominion. Our choices directly affect that home. If you decide one day that you have the freedom to create a campfire on your living room floor, do you have the right to do that? Yes. Is that your dominion? Absolutely. Bad call, but that is your choice. You can create a campfire right there in the middle of your living room. It's your domain, but it will affect, your domain will be affected by your decision. It will be. You cannot go to the builder of the house and blame him. You can't do that. Hey, I started a fire here, it burned the whole house down. I need to talk to the creator and tell you how this is your problem. Look what you did. Look what you allowed. Hold on, I sold that to you. I gave that to you. It's your dominion. And you have free will. You can do whatever you want in that dominion. We would not go to the builder of the home and say, you need to answer for this. We all understand that. That's a simple illustration. We all understand that. We often miss this verse when we're trying to understand suffering. God gave us dominion. He gave us dominion. In other words, He made us managers. He made us managers. If a manager of a store does something that they shouldn't, we expect the manager to answer for the crime or whatever. We expect them to face the consequences. We don't typically blame the CEO, do we? We don't typically do that. If you go to a restaurant today and the manager does something and you think that guy shouldn't work here anymore because of what he did, we don't blame the CEO. We don't demand that the entire company take the blame for what the manager did because they were the manager. They were left there to manage. It is their dominion. When we miss the fact that God gave us dominion, we miss the part that we have in suffering. We miss that part. And we put all the blame on God's shoulders, and we blame Him, and we look at Him as an unloving God because we forget the fact that He gave us dominion. We can't overlook this. He did give us dominion. God made us managers of the earth that he created, and then he warned us about the consequences of our decisions. He didn't just go, let's see what they do. No, he talked to us. He told us, hey, by the way, there's good and bad here, so let me tell you about your decisions here. Love and rejection were our options, because there has to be an option, because love cannot be forced. So there has to be an option. We have love and we have rejection. God wanted us to choose love, but rejection was also available. So he wanted us to know what would happen if we chose to reject him. If you choose not to have this relationship, you choose to do things your own way and on your own, I want to let you know what's going to happen. Genesis chapter 2 and verse 17. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. This is what was naturally going to happen if they disobeyed. They would surely die. Death was the only outcome there could be. Remember, God is the giver of life. God is life. Everything about God, he's life. So if you choose to reject him, you get the natural consequences, and that is death. It's just the natural outcome. You get death. The day Adam and Eve ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, death did occur. Now we know that Adam lived to be 930 years old. The Bible does tell us that. He lived to be 930 years old, so we know that they did not die physically that day. They did not die physically, but they immediately experienced spiritual death. And things started changing for them. When Paul writes to the Corinthians, or not to the Corinthians, but to the Christians in the Ephesian church, he says this. Look at Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 1. And you he made alive who were dead in trespasses and sins. You were dead. When Adam and Eve chose rejection over relationship, spiritual death was instant. It just happened. That's the natural outcome. It just happened. When we get to the New Testament, we see the apostles speak of this death often. We who were dead, death came upon all. We see these phrases in the New Testament talking about this death. John actually takes it in a different direction, and he explains it really well. He not only brings up the topic of death, he also explains how it happens. And this is it. It's a really simple explanation. 1 John chapter 5 and verse 12. He who has the Son has life. He who does not have the Son of God does not have life. Where does life come from? If you want that life, if you want eternal life, if you want that experience, where are you going to find it? God. That's it. If you have him, you have life. If you don't have him, you don't have life. That's not a tough one. That's just plain and simple. Before Adam and Eve sinned, there was no sin nature. God gave them life. Death wasn't even part of the picture. It wasn't anywhere to be seen. But once they brought sin in, it changed their very nature, and now they understood the difference between good and evil. They understood both, good and evil. Evil was now part of everyday life. The sad thing is that it did not affect them alone. Sin never only affects the person who commits it. Never. You're like, yeah, but I have a secret sin. I promise you, you're affecting other people with that secret sin, because it's changing you, which is going to impact other people. Sin never only affects the person who commits it. See, now their children were born into sin also. Adam and Eve were going to produce children, and those children were going to be born into sin. Look at Romans chapter 5 and verse 12. Therefore, just as through one man sin entered in the world, and death through sin, and thus death spread to all men because all sinned. A sinful creature cannot produce a righteous creature. It's like expecting a dog to produce a horse. It's just not going to happen. A sinful creature cannot produce a righteous creature. It's not going to happen. Only God can make one righteous. But something else took place when they chose to sin. The manager made a move that affected his dominion. That's what we did as mankind. We made a decision that affected our dominion. Everything that Adam and Eve were placed in dominion over suffered at the hands of their decision. Everything they were over. Look at Genesis chapter 3 and verse 17. Then to Adam he said, this is God speaking to Adam, then to Adam he said, because you have heeded the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree of which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of it, cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. And you shall eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you shall return. That phrase, for your sake, means on account of you. On account of you. On account of Adam and Eve's decision to sin, everything under their rule fell victim to that choice, including death itself. Death was brought in because of their decision, not because of God's decision. Death was brought in because they had that choice: love, relationship, or rejection. Do it your own way. That's your choice. You have to have an option, otherwise you're forced to love, and love cannot be forced. So there has to be an option. Our dominion had fallen. That's what happened because of our decision. Our environment changed. Now we don't walk in the cool of the day with God in the Garden of a Paradise. We don't do that anymore. We don't walk in the cool of the day like Adam and Eve were able to do. Instead, we live among suffering and disease and death. That's our environment. That's our dominion. And God never wanted that for us. He gave us exactly what he wanted us to have. But he had to give us the option to choose it for ourselves. That choice had to be there. And we chose sin, and sin separated us from our God, and now we are all born spiritually dead. We did this to ourselves. This past week was a rough week as far as temperature goes. I don't know if you missed that. Praise God. Maybe you were on vacation. Maybe you slept all week. I don't know. But it was a rough one, okay? This week was a rough one as far as temperature goes. The heat index was between 105 and 120 for several days in a row. If that's your comfort level, you need counseling. That is not a good thing. I don't like that. I don't like that temperature. Now, I could have walked outside and complained to God for the fact that my situation was less than desirable. I could have done that. And maybe some of you did. but I could have done that. I could have complained to God, I don't like this. You control that sun. Fix it. I could have complained about that. But there's only one problem. I live in Missouri. That's just what it's like. That's just what it's like. It could snow the next day. We don't know. This is Missouri. We play by our own rules. That's just what it's like. This is Missouri. If I moved to Colorado, the temperature might have been cooler, but I would have had to forfeit my desire to breathe because the air is much thinner in Colorado because of altitude. I'd be up there dying, and very comfortable as far as temperature goes, but I can't breathe. So I have to forfeit the ability to breathe. On the other hand, I could have moved down to Mississippi. I could have gone down there where the altitude is not a problem, but the humidity is so bad that you have to learn to breathe underwater. It's miserable down there. What I'm trying to say is this: when you live in a certain environment, certain things are expected. That's just what you get because that's the environment you live in. We live in an environment of a fallen, sin-tainted world. That is our environment. That's what we did to our dominion. We ruined it. Suffering is part of what we created by poor management. It's not what God designed. It is not what God designed. The question of suffering came up in King Solomon's life. A lot of questions came up in King Solomon's life. He asked a lot of questions. He searched for happiness and contentment only to find out that God is where that is found. If you're going to find happiness and contentment, it's not going to be in money. It's not going to be in people. It's not going to be in things. It's in Him. It's in Him. But he also helped us understand what is going on with the topic of sorrow. And this is an incredible verse. As I was studying this for this sermon this week, my wife stumbled on this passage and sent it to me. She goes, hey, you should check this verse out because I think it really connects well to what you are trying to say. And I read it, I'm like, that is what I'm trying to say. All I had to do was get up there and read the verse to everybody and we could have gone. But I'm not throwing away all the work I did. So I want to show you this verse, and it is an incredible verse. It's in Ecclesiastes chapter 9. Let's look at this. Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and verse 2. All things come alike to all, One event happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good, the clean, and the unclean, to him who sacrifices and him who does not sacrifice. As is the good, so is the sinner. He who takes an oath, as he who fears an oath. This is an evil in all that is done under the sun, that one thing happens to all. Truly, the hearts of the Son of Men are full of evil. Madness is in their hearts while they live, and after that they go to the dead. But for him who is joined to all the living, there is hope. Solomon offers us hope in the midst of suffering. He tells us that while we're living in a sin-filled world, all things come alike to all of us. Bad things happen to good people. Good things happen to bad people. All things come alike to all of us. The heart of mankind is full of evil. It's full of evil. It doesn't matter if you're righteous or wicked, sin affects us all. It's our environment, it is our dominion, this is what we did, it affects us all. Our dominion has been destroyed by our choices, and mankind continues to make bad choices. So we are going to continue to put out destruction. And all things come to all of us. We all have to live in this environment. God gave us the gift of life, and he gave us a place to live it in peace. We chose to introduce the picture of sin. That is what we did. And that's when suffering was born. That's when it came in. That's when it happened. We used our free will foolishly, and we changed our environment. The same as if you were to start that campfire in your living room. Your choice changed your environment. Suffering is because of the part we had in everything, not because of the part God had in everything. It's not his fault. It is our fault. Let me paint an illustration with a picture that we can all understand easily. In the winter, Missouri's fun too. 30 degrees below zero sometimes, or 60 degrees at Thanksgiving. We don't know. We just wake up the next day and find out. Watch the Weather Channel. That doesn't matter. Walk outside. There's your accurate forecast. But in the winter, it does get icy. Sometimes we have ice storms here in Missouri, and they're bad. Trees come down and all sorts of things. But let's say you're driving down the road in the ice, and you slip on that ice. You cannot control your car. Or maybe you were looking on your cell phone, and you look up and realize there's a car coming close. You got to stomp on those brakes, but you got ice. So you end up flipping that car. First thing we do is call Ford or Chevy, right? The first thing we do, call Ford or Chevy. Like, I need to tell you what your creation did. Let me tell you the problem I have with this car. We don't do that. We don't do that. You cannot blame the creator. The environment or the manager is where the problem occurred. It is not the manufacturer. It is not the creator. The problem happened with the management or the environment, one or the other, but it's not Ford or Chevy's fault. We wouldn't do that. Please don't do that. It'll embarrass you. We don't do that. And we all can understand that. Easily, we understand you can't call the creator and say, look, it's your fault. We can't do that. God's goal was life, not death. And by the way, his goal hasn't changed. It is still life. It is not death. One of the most incredible truths about God is that he didn't forget about us. By the way, we might have thrown all of us away if we were in his position, but he did not. He did not forget about us. Look at John chapter 3 and verse 17. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. God did not see the mess we made and just sit there as a spectator. He got involved. He got involved. That is a good God. That's a lot of love right there. He personally placed himself into the human experience to bring us back to him. That's big love. That's big love. He suffered in our environment. He came here because we couldn't get there. So he came to us, and he suffered in our environment. He felt the burden of sin, a sin-cursed world. He felt the burden of the environment that we created, what we've done to our dominion. He was here and he suffered under that. He felt the pain and the struggles of life. He even watched his loved ones die. Death wasn't supposed to be part of the picture, and he watched his own loved ones die. He came right into the middle of our broken dominion to take on our penalty. That's incredible. Look at Isaiah chapter 53 and verse 4. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. He was abused by our sinfulness. He was the victim of our sin nature, and he was murdered by our own people. And then 3 days later, he came back to life to inform us of the greatest news that was ever told. The offer is back on the table. Relationship. Will you choose me? And it has to be a choice. Even now, it has to be a choice. I will not force you to choose me, but I went through everything to get to you. And I opened the doors because you couldn't get to me. I came to you, and I paid the penalty. I've done everything to make sure that you know you can be saved and you can have that life that you rejected at the very beginning. The offer's back on the table. Will you choose me? And many of us say, I will not. Well, love cannot be forced. Love cannot be forced. So the option's back on the table for all of mankind, but many of us will not choose that. If you want to know God's part in the story, there it is. If you want to know what part he had in all the suffering and everything, that's it. He experienced all the suffering. He put himself into our dominion, and he lived in that dominion. That's his part of the story. He never stopped pursuing you. Even after we butchered everything, he said, I will not give up on them. I've got an idea. Let's give them life. Let's give them that choice back. The reason people struggle with the question of why God allows suffering is because they fail to see him as he is. We don't have a God who's a micromanager, nor would we want one. You wouldn't want a God who was a micromanager. Honestly, if you think about it, let's just be honest for just a second. I want him to micromanage you, but I don't want him to micromanage me. If you think about that, that's how we define the suffering problem. God, it's your fault because you didn't take care of what they did. Like, let me micromanage you. No. I want to do my own thing. I want my own free will. Oh, I want to do my thing. So micromanager or not, which way do you want this? No, we wouldn't want a micromanager. We wouldn't want God to do that. We wouldn't want to serve that God. We also don't want to have a God who is distant and uninvolved. We don't want that either. Boy, we just can't be made happy, can we? We don't want either of those things. But we do have a God who chose to make us the recipient of his love. Love must have a recipient, and he chose you to be that recipient. And then he gave us a dominion and a free will. He gave us the choice to love him in return. And we chose to do things our own way. That's what we did. We just chose to do things our own way. At that point, our environment was saturated by sin, and it has been ever since. This is our dominion. This is it. Suffering, disease, cruelty, and even unintentional deaths are all part of poor management. Sometimes you say, well, look at what happened to the innocents. Look what happened to the innocents. Who sinned that person had to go through that? We all did. Oh, so it's my fault they died. No, that's just part of your environment. Look what we created for ourselves. We brought all of that into our environment. And sometimes bad things happen to good people. Sometimes the innocent suffer. Death comes upon all. All things happen to all of us because that's the environment we live in. That's the environment we created. But there is hope, and there is a promise. So let me give you a little encouragement here. As Solomon said, all things come alike to all. But for him who is joined to all the living, there is hope. There is hope. One day, the children of God will be revealed in new bodies. That is a promise. And like, well, I don't understand. You know, like say, no, that sounds sci-fi. Well, we believe that God spoke the world into existence. That's not sci-fi. But the fact that he's going to give us new bodies one day, we think, now that's just crazy. It's all God. It's all outside of our understanding, okay? But we say, the Bible says that one day the children of God will be revealed in new bodies. Christ is coming back, and when he does, all of the waiting will be over. Let me show you the picture of what's going to happen that day. And I've already got goosebumps coming because I know the verse. I know what I'm about to read. Let's look at this verse together. Romans chapter 8 and verse 19. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope, that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. That verse is in the Bible. Creation, our environment, our dominion suffers and it groans and it's looking forward to Jesus Christ coming back, and he makes all things new. Even our earth is groaning. The Bible says it's like a woman who's pregnant and groaning in those pains, waiting for the fulfillment. Please bring it. End the suffering. Even our world, even our earth is excited. Creation is excited about the fact that one day the children of God will be revealed. Completely new. Not just a new heart and a new spirit, but a new body. They can't wait for it. The environment is going to change. There's the good news. Our environment is going to change. Jesus is going to return and gather those who have chosen him together. He's going to do it. It's going to happen. Then he's going to return the dominion back to the way he designed it in the first place. Now we will have a spirit that is compatible with that environment. That environment will be made compatible with who we are in Christ because we chose love instead of rejection. And now it will all fit together. That day is coming. God has to allow suffering because he had to give us free will. He did not create suffering, but he did give us an option, and we created suffering. Suffering came because of how we used that free will. That's where it happened. And one day it's going to end, he promised. It's coming. It's coming. One day it's all going to end. In the meantime, we have a dominion to take care of. And no, it's not ideal. No, it's not ideal, but this is our dominion. This is what we have. There is suffering and heartache among our people. It's happening all the time. But they need to hear the truth about who God is. Yes, he allows it. No, he did not cause it. But he does allow it. He had to allow it. You and I live in a broken world. That is our dominion. Write it down, remember it. Hey, look what we did. And this is where we live. We can't complain about the environment that we chose to live in. This is what we did to ourselves. But we can still make a difference. We can still have an impact on this world. Even though it's broken, we can still make a difference. We are here. We are children of God, and we have a light. God has shown us the light of his love, and we can get out there and show that to other people. We can still make a difference. Let's look back at Genesis one more time. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over all the earth." Don't miss this part of the story of suffering. Let them have dominion over all the earth. After God did this, he told Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply. He wanted to add people to the family of God. Go, be fruitful and multiply. Well, this is our world, and this is our dominion. And even though it suffers under the influence of sin, this remains our home. This is our environment. This is our dominion. So family of God, get out there, be fruitful, and multiply. That's what we're supposed to be doing. Add people to the family of God. Go out there and shine the light. Shine that love and let them see it. In a world full of suffering, people need to know that there is a God who relentlessly is pursuing their redemption. That's his part of the story. That's his part of the story. God never caused suffering, but he is going to end it. Get out there and let them know.